Race to the Skies, The Rise and Fall of Arrow, an American Legend, Episode 6. Folks, today we're looking at the legendary giant, Aerodynamic, and its contribution to our amusement park industry as we know today.
Many of the flat rides and kids rides and the early coasters that they built are staples in many of the parks around the world today.
Aerodynamic left us with such a profound and long history with its contribution. So to do its justice, we're going to break the segment in two segments. First one is its contribution, and the second segment would be its economic issues. While Europe and the rest of the world was undergoing reparation and recovery from World War II, America was relatively untouched, and after World War II emerged as an economic superpower, America was ready to play.
Arrow Development was founded in 1945 by four men: Ed Morgan, Angus Anderson, Carl Bacon, and William Hardiman, in Mountain View, California.
Folks, this is the town of Mountain View, California. And this is the original shop. It's amazing. From this humble beginning emerged one of the giants of our time.
The four men met while working for a machinist company that had a contract with the Navy. Unhappy with the conditions at the company, they decided to start their own. During the early years, the company provided used machine tools and made parts for trucks, which were hard to come by after the war.
In the beginning, they were doing anything to bring in the dollars. They were doing odd jobs such as fixing foreign cars, but the one they stumbled on accidentally was they were dabbling in amusement rides and kiddie rides for the local West Coast amusement parks. And this caught the attention of Walt Disney, the animator. He was famous for all his cartoon and Mickey Mouse animation. And he wanted to develop a park for families where he could bring the magic of Disney's alive.
Impressed with the quality of the rides that he had seen built by Arrow previously, he contracted them for 6 rides at his new theme park called Disneyland. Disneyland opened in July of 1955, and the relationship between Arrow and Disney lasted until 1971.
In the beginning, just like any amusement park or industry, they had problem on opening days. But what impressed Walt Disney the most was the perseverance and the persistence of Arrow employees to solve any problem that arise. And for this, he was loyal to them for a long time.
Yeah, he even bought 1/3 stake in the company, in Arrow Development, partially because he was so impressed with the company, and also because he wanted them to be around to maintain his rides and to develop new rides for his parks. Unfortunately, that relationship only lasted until his death in 1966. One of the problems that Arrow Development solved for Disney was the Autopia ride. Arrow had developed a center rail guidance system for their antique cars.
Yeah, the Autopia was more like a go-kart thing, which caused a lot of mechanical problems.
Yeah, and a lot of damage, too, to the ride and to the employees.
Who would have thought from this humble beginning emerged one of a classic, the moon car. The classic, it's called moon car?
Well, the antique rides.
Yeah.
And they're in almost every park.
So this is where the antique car arrives, folks.
Then in 1959, Disney opened their Matterhorn bobsled ride, which was the first roller coaster built by Arrow. It is also the first coaster to use a steel tubular track. This would dramatically change how roller coasters were designed and built after that. Also in 1959, a Texas oil man named Angus Wynn, seeing the success that Disney had with his park in California, decided he wanted to try and bring that to Texas. So in 1961, Six Flags Over Texas opened in Arlington, Texas. Just like Disney, Six Flags counted on Arrow to provide a lot of the flat rides and kid rides that they used at the park. And then in 1963, Arrow debuted their new ride, which was a water ride called El Aserradero at Six Flags Over Texas. That's their log flume. The ride was so popular they had to add a second flume to the ride the next year. Then in 1966, Arrow Development introduced their Runaway Mine Train at Six Flags Over Texas. This was the first one that was ever built.
This becomes the staples for most amusement parks, if not all amusement parks in the world.
Then in 1975, Arrow Development introduced the world to the first modern inverting roller coaster called Corkscrew at Knott's Berry Farm. Not only did it turn riders upside down, but it turned them upside down twice in a row. Then in 1978, Arrow built Gemini, which was its only racing coaster that they ever built, and that's at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. This is such a great ride. It's very smooth. Even today, it's still a smooth ride, and it's still a lot of fun. In 1981, they built the first suspended coaster called the Bat at Kings Island. Unfortunately, it was plagued with engineering problems and had to be scrapped. What we're looking at here is the new version of the Bat that was built in 1993. Arrow had fixed the design flaws that they had with the original suspended coasters and had built two successful ones prior to this one. This one opened in 1993 as Top Gun, and then later Flight Deck, and then in 2014 it was rethemed as the Bat, bringing back the original name.
Folks, what you see here is Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. This is the only 7 inversion looping coaster made by Arrow left. Folks, this is Magnum XL, the first hyper coaster to be built. It was built by the late Ron Toomer of Aerodynamic. This is the culprit that's responsible for all the roller coaster war in the late 80s, early 90s, where everyone's rushing to get higher and taller and faster.
So in 1991, Arrow introduced us to Steel Phantom at Kennywood. At the time, it was the tallest and fastest looping coaster in the world, over 200 feet and over 80 miles an hour. But it didn't hit the 200-foot drop until the second drop. The initial lift hill was less than 200 feet. And the last coaster that Aerodynamics built was X at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. This, I think, is their masterpiece as far as engineering goes. It was the first delve into 4D.
And the sad part about it is that they couldn't even finish this construction of this coaster. They were in the midst of bankruptcy. In 1971, Ed Morgan and Carl Bacon decided to retire, and they sold the company to Rio Grande Railroad. Ed's son Dana Morgan stayed behind, so did Ron Toomer.
Rio Grande Industries had purchased the company in hopes to build their own chain of amusement parks similar to Six Flags. They were quite impressed with the success that Angus Wynn had had. And they owned the company until 1981 when they decided to diversify and sell it off. In 1981, Arrow was sold to HUSS, a
German company. They specialize in more flat rides than coasters, but
But in the end, HUSS was just more interested in making profits instead of making quality product.
And the company became stagnant and did not put out more new, innovative, and leading technology that Arrow was known for.
At this time, hoping to break into the European market, Arrow started negotiating with Vekoma, a Dutch ride manufacturer, to provide the steel for their coasters.
But they also made a mistake of giving the blueprint. You should never give your trade secrets to another company. Arrow showed Vekoma how to make those tubular track that Arrow's known for. But this is a slight variation of Arrow's design.
And in the early 80s, Vekoma was working on a design for what would become their Boomerang, which was released in 1984. So this was only a slight variation from the track design that Arrow had supplied to Vekoma originally. In 1986, unhappy with the merger and the direction that the company was going in, 13 of the officers in the North American division negotiated a buyout and broke away from the company, forming Aerodynamics.
Also at this time, a former employee of Intamin Givanola, Bolliger, and Mabillard broke away in 1988 and formed B&M. Folks remember the mistake that Arrow made earlier by revealing the trade secrets to Vekoma? Well, B&M took it further. They improved on the design of the tubular steel track. Well, the difference between this and that is their track is actually wider. It's more a box spine that creates a sturdier and smoother ride compared to Arrow.
So what you see here is Batman from Six Flags Great America. This is what made B&M a hot commodity and really put them on the map in the roller coaster world.
And Arrow could not keep up with them. Their design was outdated and it has its flaw.
And Arrow tried to keep up with B&M. In 1992, they opened Drakenfire at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg. Unfortunately, it was just a really rough ride, and they could never get the transitions to become smooth, no matter how hard they tried. Eventually, in 1998, the coaster was scrapped. But Arrow wasn't the only one who had that problem. Vekoma has also tried to keep up with B&M and designed their suspended coaster, SLCs, and those are just really rough. They just cannot compare with the B&Ms.
After many years of struggling to stay afloat and compete with companies such as B&M and Intamin, Aerodynamic declared bankruptcy on December 3rd, 2001. This is X in Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. This is when they built this. Aerodynamic was going through bankruptcy. They didn't even finish building this coaster.
Six Flags had to come in and finish the build, producing the steel for the rest of the track and completing the ride. It did have some troubles, though, mechanically. The trains were too heavy for the structure, as it was, and it had to be closed in 2007 for a overhaul.
And reopened in 2010, May 2010 as X2.
Even though several attempts were made to keep Aerodynamics open and running, unfortunately, it just wasn't in the cards for them. On October 28, 2002, S&S Worldwide purchased a large chunk of the assets from Aero Development, and the rest of the company was dissolved. Even though Aerodynamics and Aero Development are no longer with us, we still have many of their rides in many of the parks around the world.
So the next time you go to amusement park, enjoy those mine train, the log flume, the moon cars. This is the legacy of Aero. They are no longer with us, but damn, it did enrich our lives. This is T.
And I'm Tom.
We're from Show Me Coasters.
Thank you for watching and have a great night.
Thank you.